Fleet Marshal Cedron Call had stopped once, and had spent every year since being unable to live with what stopping meant, and he had come to Saltlick to fix that, by proving that he should never have stopped at all. Years before, above a worked-out mining moon called Cold Harbor, Call had stood on a bridge beside Reckoner Ilsa Marinon and watched a number that had never lied begin, impossibly, to climb, had watched a world that should have folded refuse to, and had listened to Marinon tell him, in a voice gone strange, that the world had no fold in it, that there was no number that would make these people stop, only a number that would make them all dead, and that those were not the same number. And Call, that day, had given the order. He had halted the strike. He had spared the survivors, out of an arithmetic Marinon offered him, no result to be had, and he had gone home believing he had done the disciplined thing, the professional thing, the thing a marshal does when killing will not achieve the aim. And he had not been able to sleep well since, not one full night in all the years between, though he had told no one that and had let no one see it, because a marshal whose officers start reading his face for cracks is a marshal already halfway to losing them. Every clean campaign he had run since Cold Harbor, on other worlds, against other peoples who folded exactly where the doctrine said they would, had made the memory worse instead of better, because each easy fold was proof that the doctrine still worked everywhere except the one place he had personally stopped testing it. If Marinon had been right, if there really was no number that made these people stop, then Call had not shown discipline at Cold Harbor. He had discovered something, and had run from it. He had looked at the one thing his whole world could not survive being true, and instead of proving it false he had stopped, and gone home, and let it sit inside him like a splinter working toward the heart, for years, the unbearable possibility that the fold that the whole accord and his whole life were built on, simply did not work on these people, and never would, and that everything he was rested on a thing that had a hole in it exactly the shape of a moon he had failed to break. So he had come to Saltlick to close the hole. Not by stopping this time. By going all the way. He would take a human world and he would apply force past any threshold ever recorded, past triple the highest yield the accord had ever measured, past every number a people could conceivably bear, and it would fold, because everything folds if you are willing to go far enough, and his failure at Cold Harbor would be revealed as exactly that, a failure, a want of will, and not the terrible discovery he was afraid it was. He would prove the file wrong. He would prove that he should never have stopped. He would break Saltlick, all the way down, and in the breaking he would finally be able to sleep, because the world would fold, because it had to fold, because the alternative was a thing Cedron Call had built his whole self on there being no such thing as. This is the story of what the marshal found at the bottom, when he went all the way down. I am not going to make it easy to watch, because it was not easy to do, and it should not be easy to watch someone do it. There is a number in this story that climbs, the way a number climbed at Cold Harbor, and this time no one stops it, because the whole point of the thing was to not stop it, to ride the number all the way to the floor and prove there was a floor. Watch it climb. Watch the man wait for the other number, the fold number, the one that would make it all mean something, to change. It does not change. That is the whole story. It does not change, and he does not stop, and by the end he has proven the one thing he came to disprove, and written it in a ledger of the dead that he can neither file nor forget. Rue Calder had been a child in a shelter once, on a moon called Cold Harbor, when the ship stopped, and she had spent her whole life since telling that story as a story of hope, right up until the ships came to Saltlick and did not stop. She told it to the children, mostly. That was her work, in the way that everyone on a frontier colony has three kinds of work and one of them is the one that matters. Rue Calder helped hold Saltlick, dug its ore and taught its young and stood its watches like everyone else, but the thing she was for, the thing the town leaned on her for without ever quite saying so, was the story. She had been there. She had been small in the shelter at Cold Harbor when the sky filled with the ships of the Accord, and she remembered the cold and the thinning air and the grown-ups holding their faces still, and she remembered a particular sound a rock made when a strike landed far off, a sound less like thunder than like a held breath let go all at once, and she remembered, most of all, the morning the ships thinned and then were gone, and the survivors came up into a scoured world under an empty sky and began again. She had carried that up out of childhood as the one thing she knew for certain about the universe, that even the accord, even the ships that could turn a field into a light you could read by, could be made to stop. She had seen it stop. And she told the children of Saltlick that story, when they were frightened, because it was true, and because a true story of the sky stopping is the most valuable thing you can give a frightened child on a world the accord has noticed. She told it best to the youngest of them, a boy named Pell who could not yet count past his own 2 hands and who asked, every time, the same question at the same place in the story, not whether the ships would come, children that age rarely asked that, but whether the people in the story had been scared, because Pell wanted to know if it was allowed. Rue always told him yes. She told him the grown-ups in her own shelter had been so scared their faces had gone still and strange, the way water goes still right before it freezes, and that being scared and being brave had turned out, in her experience, to be the same thing wearing 2 different names. Pell liked that answer. He asked for it again most nights, the way children ask for the same ending because the asking is itself a kind of safety, and Rue gave it to him again and again, because she had nothing else in the world she was more certain of. Then Saltlick got its notice, and the ships came, and Rue stood on the ridge above the town and watched them take station in the sky, and read, on the flag of the lead ship, in the accord's own script that she had taught herself to read precisely so this moment would never take her unprepared, the name of the marshal commanding, Call. She knew the name. Of course she knew the name. It was the name from the story, the name of the marshal whose ships had stopped at Cold Harbor, the hand that had spared the shelter she was small in, the reason she was alive to stand on this ridge at all. For 1 whole minute, standing there, Rue Calder felt something she was later ashamed of, which was hope, the wild childish certainty that the marshal from the story, the one who stopped, had come, and would stop again, because he was the one who stopped, because that was what he was, in the story she had told 100 frightened children, the marshal who could be made to see. For that 1 minute she even let herself think of Pell, of what she would tell him tonight, that the marshal himself had come, the very one, and that this meant something good, and she despised herself for the thought before the minute was even finished, because some old cold part of her that had survived one sky already knew better than the rest of her did. She was wrong, and it took her too long to understand why, and the understanding was the worst thing that ever happened to her, worse than the ships, worse than what came after. Because Call had not come to Saltlick in spite of being the marshal who stopped. He had come because of it. He was not the mercy from the story returning. He was the mercy from the story, unable to bear itself, coming back to prove it should never have happened. The hand that had spared her at Cold Harbor had come to Saltlick precisely to unspare, to disprove the sparing, to go all the way down this time and show that stopping had been the mistake, and Rue Calder, who had built her whole life and her whole town's hope on the story of the sky that stopped, understood, standing on the ridge, that she had told the children exactly the wrong story, that the sky did not stop because it was merciful, that it had stopped once because a reckoner did an arithmetic, and that the same marshal was back to redo the arithmetic and get a different answer, and that the different answer he wanted was written in how many of them he was willing to kill. Get the children into the deep workings, she told the town, coming down off the ridge, her voice flat, a survivor's voice, the voice she had learned from the grown-ups in the shelter who held their faces still. All of them. Now. And listen to me, all of you, because I told you a story once and I have to tell you the true one now, fast, before it starts. The sky can be made to stop. That part is true. I saw it. But it does not stop because it pities us. It stops when killing us stops being worth its while. And the man up there, she looked up, once, at the ships, at the name she knew, the man up there has come to make killing us worth his while all the way to the bottom, to prove to himself something he cannot stand to not have proven. So we are not going to be spared. Not this time. Put that out of your hearts right now, because hoping for it will get you killed slow. We are going to do the other thing. We are going to make him spend so long, and pay so much, and get so little, that the world beyond us hears what it cost him, and knows. That's all we have. Not survival. Witness. Now move. Years before Saltlick, on the bridge above Cold Harbor, Cedron Call had watched a Velthani woman he trusted more than any officer under his own command set down a cup of tea she would never pick up again, and had understood, before he understood anything else about the day, that something had gone wrong with the shape of the war. He had fought beside Ilse Marinon's word for 60 years by then, which in an Orisk marshal's life is most of a career and the whole of a professional trust, and in 60 years he had never once seen her flinch at a number. She flinched at this one. He watched the tally on the display do the thing no tally had ever done in front of him, the thing that should not have been mechanically possible, which was rise, and he watched Marinon read it a second time with the specific stillness of a woman who has decided that panic, however earned, is a luxury her rank does not permit her, and he had felt, standing beside her, the first cold thread of something he would spend the rest of his life trying and failing to name. They struck the east field in full view of the whole moon, 40,000 watching, and by every doctrine either of them had ever been taught the signal should have moved through the rest inside a day. It did not move. The deep went quiet instead, gallery by gallery, not the quiet of a beaten world sending up its hands but a quiet Marinon called, with a precision that made it worse, a world she could not read, and Call had stood at her shoulder through the whole of the third day watching a woman with 2 centuries of being right slowly discover that she might, for the first time, be wrong about something that could not be wrong. That same day, on the bridge, with the tally still climbing in front of them like a fever that would not break, she opened the old grey doctrine of the yield on the console in front of him and read him a line about a species carrying the breaking to itself, and then she told him, in a voice gone strange, the sentence that Cedron Call had carried in his chest, unspoken, every day since. There is no number that makes them stop, she said. There is only a number that makes them all dead. And those are not the same number, and I have spent 200 years unable to tell the difference, because until today it never came up. He had asked her, because it was his to ask and hers only to advise, what she recommended the fleet do next. Nothing, she said. There is nothing further to do that would not simply be killing them for no result, and I do not believe, Marshal, that either of us wants that written under our names. And Cedron Call, who had spent 60 years being the hand that carried out whatever a reckoner's number required, without softness and without cruelty, both being luxuries a professional could not afford, had looked at the tally one last time, climbing, unreadable, and had given the order to halt the strike. Only in the days after did Marinon go down to the surface herself, which reckoners did not do, because she would not carry a finding like that one to her own guild on the strength of a voice on a set and a number on a display, and Call let her go because he had learned, in 60 years, that the only argument that ever moved Ilse Marinon was her own eyes. It had felt, that day, like discipline. It had felt like the most professional thing he had ever done, the hardest kind of courage there was, the courage to stop spending a thing that was buying nothing. He went down himself as well, separately, with 2 of his own officers at his shoulders the way Marinon went with hers, not because doctrine required it but because some old unspoken Oris custom made a marshal look at what his order had and had not done, and he had seen, at a distance, the shelter where the survivors were kept, low domes of scavenged metal with a great many small faces pressed to whatever windows there were, watching the ships that had stopped killing them the way you watch. whether that might change its mind. He had not gone closer. There had been no reason to. A marshal does not count the conquered face by face. He reads the report, and the report, when it came, told him only totals, the shelter's population held and released, no names, because names were not what a casualty account existed to record. He had told himself, walking back to his shuttle, that he had done the only sound thing a professional could do, and for a long time, on the transport home and for years after, he had almost believed it. What he had not been able to stop, in all the years since, was the arithmetic itself, running quietly underneath every other thought he had, the way a fault line runs under a house that has not yet fallen down. If there truly was no number, then the Accord's whole understanding of what a war was for, break enough of them and the rest will carry the breaking to each other, the mercy built into the machine, the reason killing had ever been allowed to call itself anything but killing, had a hole in it the exact shape of one worked-out mining moon, and Call had looked directly into that hole, once, on a bridge, at Marinon's shoulder, and had chosen not to keep looking. He had chosen, instead, to file it under discipline, and to sleep, most nights, badly, telling himself that a want of will was not the same thing as a law of the universe, until the telling wore thin enough that he decided the only way to be rid of the splinter was to reach in after it himself, all the way, with a whole world if that was what it took, and pull it out. Down in the deep workings of Saltlick, in the cold and the dark that Rue Calder knew from a shelter on another world, she got 400 people underground in the space of a single terrible afternoon and did not let herself think, while she did it, about how much the smell of wet stone and lamp oil resembled the smell of the last place she had been this frightened. The workings ran deep under the ridge, an old vein worked thin and left mostly for its emptiness now, corridors and chambers cut generations back by people looking for ore and left, by luck or by some old foreman's foresight nobody now living could name, wide enough and sound enough to hold a town. Rue organized the descent the way she had once seen the grown-ups organize hers, without seeming to organize anything at all, simply moving from family to family with a low steady voice, taking the youngest from tired arms and passing them to whoever's arms were less tired, sending the strong down first to brace the narrow places and the old last because the old moved slowest and needed the clearest path. And if anyone had asked her where she had learned to do this she would have said she had not learned it, she had simply watched it done to her once and it had gone into her the way the shape of a room goes into a child raised in it, without her ever choosing to keep it. She kept account as she went, the way she could not help doing, tallying heads at each junction the way you might count sheep through a gate, not because the number would save anyone but because a number you have counted is a number you know you have not lost, and losing count, down here, felt to her like the first small surrender, the kind that let the larger one in behind it. She thought, doing it, of a woman she had never met and would never be able to name, a foreman on Cold Harbor whose story she had only ever heard secondhand, from an old man in her own shelter who had heard it from someone else entirely, a foreman who was supposed to have brought her own count up out of the dark at the very end, alone, because you always bring it up. Rue did not know if the story was true in its particulars. She had carried it anyway, the way you carry any story that tells you the shape a person is supposed to take when the roof is coming down, and she found, counting heads at the mouth of the second gallery, that it steadied her hands. By full dark the town's deep was as full as it would ever be, and quiet in the particular way of a great many frightened people trying, out of some shared and unspoken courtesy, not to add to each other's fear, and Rue stood at the head of it with a lamp in one hand and Pell's small cold fingers in the other, and above them, muffled by 12 fathoms of good rock, the first strikes began to come down on the outer settlements, a sound less like an explosion than like something enormous clearing its throat, again and again, patient, unhurried, a marshal with all the time in the world. Call opened the ledger on the first day and began to read the figures aloud to himself, waiting for the fold column to change, the way a man waits for a fever to break. He had built the whole operation around the ledger, because the ledger was the proof he had come for. It was a simple document, the fleet standing casualty account, and it had two columns that mattered, the count of the enemy dead, and, beside it, the fold index, the running measure of a population's collapse toward surrender, the number that on every world call had ever fought had risen as the dead column rose, because that was the whole mechanism of war. You killed a portion and the rest felt it and folded, and the fold index tracked the felt breaking of a people the way a fever chart tracks a fever. Call's plan, if you could call the thing a plan, was brutally simple. He would drive the dead column up, past any figure ever needed, past triple the highest yield on record, and he would watch the fold index rise with it, and when Saltlick folded, as it must, as everything must, if you go far enough, he would have his proof that Coldharbour had been a failure of will and not a law of the universe, and he would be able, at last, to sleep. The first day he took the outer settlements, and the dead column rose, and the fold index did not move. "It is early yet, Marshal," said Flag Officer Odravrai, who had commanded his forward squadron for the better part of a decade and had never once in that time heard him talk to a document the way he talked to this one. A fold index barely stirs on the opening day of any campaign. The felt breaking takes time to gather. You have seen it a dozen times. I have, Call said, and he believed her, and he read the figures aloud that night anyway, the dead column climbing, the fold index flat, and told himself the fold was coming, and pushed harder the second day, and the dead column rose again, faster now, and the fold index did not move, and he told himself again that it was early, and pushed harder still. By the third day Vroi had stopped offering the reassurance, not because she no longer believed it but because she had begun, watching her marshal, to suspect that the reassurance was doing something to him she did not have a name for. She had served under commanders who enjoyed a hard campaign and commanders who endured one, and she had never served under a man who read a casualty figure the way Call now read his, slowly, each digit given its own weight, as if the number itself might, if he pronounced it correctly, finally answer him. She said nothing of this. It was not a flag officer's place to comment on how her marshal read a ledger, only to keep it honest, and she kept it honest, and the fold index stayed at 0, and the dead column climbed past the figure at which any catalogued species in the Accord's long record would have folded outright, cleanly, with terms offered and taken, and still it did not move. By the fourth day it was not early anymore, and Cedron Call sat with the ledger in the marshal's cabin of his flagship and felt the splinter that had been working toward his heart for years finally reach it. Because he understood, reading the flat fold index beside the climbing dead, that he was not folding Saltlick. He was killing it. The two columns were supposed to move together, that was the whole of war, that was the mechanism, that was the thing that made killing a means to an end and not an end in itself, and here they had come apart, the dead column climbing and the fold index dead flat, and the coming apart of those two columns was the exact thing Ilse Marinon had told him at Coldharbour, in the strange voice, years ago. There is a number that makes them stop, and a number that makes them all dead, and they are not the same number. Call had come to Saltlick to prove Marinon wrong. And the ledger in his hands, in his own fleet's figures, in the coldest and most incontrovertible language the Accord had, was proving her right, line by climbing line, and there was no way to read it otherwise, and Cedron Call had spent 4 days and a mounting mountain of the human dead purchasing, at the highest price the galaxy had ever paid for a piece of knowledge, the exact truth he had come to destroy. It isn't moving, Vroi said, quietly, that fourth night, looking at the fold index. She was disciplined, and she had followed Call a long way, and there was something in her voice now that had not been there before. Marshal. The fold index. It hasn't moved since the first hour. We are far past any threshold in the book. And it hasn't moved. They aren't folding. They're just, she stopped. They're just dying, sir. We're not defeating them. We're only killing them. And it isn't the same thing, and I don't think it's going to become the same thing, however far we take it. Read me the dead column, Call said. She read it. It was a figure no war in the Accords record had ever reached against a single colony. And the fold index. 0, sir, she said. Same as the first hour. 0. And Cedron Call sat with the two numbers, the enormous climbing dead and the flat unmoving 0, and understood that he had his proof, and that it was the opposite of the proof he had come for, and that there was now only one question left, the only question the whole terrible enterprise had ever really been about, which was whether, having learned that he could not fold Saltlick, he would stop, and admit that Cold Harbor had been a discovery and not a failure, or whether he would go on, past the point of any possible aim, killing a world that would not fold for no reason now except that stopping meant admitting the thing he had come all this way to not admit. She told the children a new story, in the deep, in the dark, on the second night, when the sound above them had gone from the enormous throat-clearing of the outer strikes to something closer and worse, and it was the hardest thing she ever did, because it was the true one. I told you the sky could be made to stop, she said, to the small frightened faces in the lamplight, Pell among them with his knees drawn up to his chin, and beside him a girl of about 13 named Surah who had appointed herself, without asking anyone, the keeper of the younger children's blankets and their quiet, and that was true, but I told it to you wrong, and you deserve it told right, even now, especially now. The sky stops when we make stopping worth more than going on. And this sky is not going to stop, because the man flying it needs us not to fold more than he needs anything, and so we are not going to be spared. I'm sorry. I would give anything to tell you the other story. But here is the true one, and it is not nothing, it is the biggest thing there is, we cannot be folded. Surah asked her, in the flat careful voice of a girl trying hard to sound like she was not asking the thing she was actually asking, whether that meant they were going to die anyway, whether the true story was just the sad version of the hopeful one with the ending taken out. Rue thought about lying to her, because Surah was 13 and 13 still deserves, on some nights, to be lied to kindly, and then she looked at the girl's face and saw that Surah already knew, had known since the strike started sounding closer, and that what she wanted was not comfort but company in knowing it, and Rue gave her that instead. Some of us are, Rue said, quietly, so only Surah and the oldest of them could hear it plainly, though she did not try very hard to keep it from the rest, because she had decided, walking down into the deep that first day, that she would not spend her people's last hours managing what they were and were not allowed to understand. Maybe all of us, if he goes far enough, and I think he means to go as far as there is. But dying and being folded are not the same thing, Surah, and that is the whole of what I have to give you instead of a happy ending. He can kill us. He is killing us. But he cannot make us stop, cannot make us give up, cannot make us all lie down at once and say yes, because there is no all of us that could say it, there is just you, and you, and you, and she touched, lightly, the shoulder of the boy nearest her, and then Surah's, and then her own chest, each your own, and not one of you can surrender for the child beside you, and so none of us ever folds, not really, not the way he needs. He will kill us and he will not fold us, and the difference is the only thing we own, and it is worth everything, and you are part of it just by being here, just by being your own self that nobody, not even that man up there with all those ships, can reach in and switch off. That's the true story. Hold on to it. It's better than the other one. It's just harder. Pell, who had been quiet through all of it in the particular concentrated way of a small child working very hard to understand something too large for him, tugged at her sleeve and asked his old question in a new shape, not whether the people in the story had been scared, but whether he was allowed to be scared and still be the thing she had just described, the thing that could not be switched off. That's the whole trick of it, Rue told him, and pulled him into her side, and felt Surah lean into her other shoulder without being asked, the way the youngest children in the shelter at Coldharbour must once have leaned into someone whose name she had never learned. Being scared and not folding aren't opposites, Pell. You can be as scared as you want. You can be scared all the way to the end, if it comes to that, and it will not make one bit of difference to whether you folded, because folding was never about being brave enough. It was always about whether there was a bell that could ring in all of us at once, and there isn't one, there has never been one, and that is not because we are strong. It's because we are separate, every one of us, all the way down, and separate turns out to be a thing that cannot be broken the way a single thing can be broken. So be as scared as you need to be. I am. I am scared right now, sitting here with you. And I am not folding, and neither are you, and neither is Surah, and that is going to be true all the way to the end of this, whatever the end of this turns out to be. And the children of Saltlick, in the deep dark, held on to it, each in their own small separate heart, and did not fold, because they could not, because there was no lever in the whole armory of the accord that reached the place where a human child decides, alone, to keep being. On the third night, before the fold index had gone from merely unmoving to the thing that would break him, Cedron Call did something he had not done since Coldharbour, which was to ask a subordinate for her honest reading of a number before he had decided what he wanted the answer to be. "Tell me plainly, Vry," he said. "Not what the doctrine expects. What you actually see." She considered it longer than he liked, which told him something in itself. "I see a marshal who has already passed triple the worst yield on record," she said, "against a people who do not appear to have a yield to pass. I see a dead column that would end any war in the catalogue 3 times over, and a fold index that reads the way it read in the first hour of the first day, as if the two of them are not measuring the same war at all. I have served 14 campaigns under your command, Marshal, and I have never once seen those two figures disagree this badly, and I confess I do not know what to recommend, because doctrine has no page for a population that will not answer to it." "Say the rest of it," Call said, because he had heard, under the careful phrasing, the thing she had not yet allowed herself to say outright. Vry was quiet a moment, and when she spoke again her voice had lost the flatness of a report and taken on something closer to a confession. "The rest of it, sir, is that I do not think the number is going to move. I think we could take this figure to 10 times the worst yield on record and it would still read 0, because 0 is not a low reading, it is the reading you get when the instrument is measuring nothing at all. I think we are not fighting a war anymore. I think we stopped fighting a war somewhere around the second day, and what we have been doing since is something else, and I do not have a word for it that I am willing to say in a report." Call did not answer her for a long time. He looked instead at the display, at the dead column and the fold index sitting side by side the way they had sat since the first hour, and he thought, not for the first time, of a reckoner setting a book face down on a console because she could not bear, in that moment, to treat it the way a reckoner is supposed to treat a text, and he understood that he was closer than he had ever been to doing the same thing with his own ledger, closing it, setting it down, walking away from the number. Before the number finished telling him what it had already told Marinon years before he was ready to hear it from anyone at all. "Continue the campaign," he said instead, and Vry logged the order without another word, because that, too, was a flag officer's place, and if there was anything in her voice or her face that night that a kinder marshal might have read as the beginning of a private grief of her own, Call did not let himself see it, because he had stopped, by the third night, letting himself see very much of anything that was not the ledger. By the fourth night, Cedron Call had his answer, and that is the thing to hold on to through everything that came before it and everything that came after, because it is the part that damns him, and it is a choice, and choices are the only things in a story that are truly anyone's own. The ledger in his own hand, in his own fleet's cold figures, told him past any denying that Saltlick would not fold, could not fold, that there was no number in the dead column that would move the zero in the fold index, that Ilse Marinon had been right on the bridge above Cold Harbor and that he had just spent an ocean of the human dead proving it. He had come to disprove the file. He had proven it instead, more completely and more expensively than any report from any corner of the frontier, in the most incontrovertible language the Accord owned. The knowledge he had crossed the galaxy and killed a world to reach was now his, entire, undeniable. And it was the opposite of the knowledge he had wanted, and it left him exactly one decision, the only real decision of the whole atrocity, to stop. He sat alone in the marshal's cabin that night with a halt order drafted and unsent on the console in front of him, the same order, in the same standing fleet form, that he had given once before above a different moon, and for a long while he simply looked at it. He could give it again. He could halt the strike, the way he had halted it at Cold Harbor, and this time the stopping would mean something different and worse. It would mean admitting that Cold Harbor had not been a failure of will but a true discovery, that the fold did not work on these people, that everything he had done at Saltlick had been not a proof but a slaughter. Thousands upon thousands of the dead purchased to teach him a thing a reckoner had told him for 3 years before. Stopping meant carrying that. It meant going home not as the marshal who proved the file wrong but as the marshal who proved it right with his own hands and a mountain of bodies. It was an unbearable thing to carry. But it was there, on the console, unsent, the whole of the night to send it in. He could stop, and the killing would end, and the survivors in the deep workings would come up under an empty sky the way Rue Calder once had, and Cedron Call would have to live as the man who learned the truth twice, once for free and once for an atrocity. He did not send it. He read the order through once more, and then a second time, and on the second reading he found himself, without quite deciding to, reaching not for the transmission key but for the ledger beside it, and reading the dead column instead, aloud, the way he had read it every night since the first, waiting for the fold index to answer him back, as if one more reading, one more hour, might yet produce the number he had crossed the galaxy for. It did not answer him. It was never going to answer him. He knew that, sitting there, as certainly as he had known anything in his life, and he read the figures anyway, and he did not send the order, and somewhere in the reading and the not sending the fourth night became the fifth, and the halt order sat unsent on the console until it was no longer an order for anything, because by the time he might have sent it there was no longer a strike left to halt. He went on. Not because going on would work, going on was, by the fourth night, no longer a strategy of any kind, there being nothing left to achieve that 4 days had not already either achieved or proven unachievable, but because going on let him not know for a little longer, let him keep telling himself that the fold was one more push away, that the zero would move if he only drove the dead column high enough, that he had not yet failed because he had not yet stopped. A man who has not stopped can still tell himself the fold is coming. A man who stops has to tell himself, instead, the truth, and Cedron Call, on the fourth night above Saltlick, with the truth already sitting in his own hand and his own fleet's own figures, chose the number over the truth, and kept killing a world to avoid knowing a thing he already knew. By the fourth night the strikes had reached the ridge itself, and the deep workings that had held 400 people since the first afternoon held fewer than that now, gallery by gallery going the way galleries go when the roof above them stops being a roof, and Rue Calder spent what turned out to be the last full night of her life doing the only thing that was left to do, which was to keep the children who remained believing the true story a little longer than the world outside was willing to let them. She had moved the youngest of them, Pell and a handful of others, into the deepest chamber the workings had, a low dry room cut generations back for reasons no living person remembered, and she stayed at its mouth with Sura beside her, the two of them taking it in turns to go back along the failing galleries and bring up whoever could still be brought, because you always bring up your count, even when the count is only grief, even when the bringing up costs you an hour you did not have to spend. She did not let herself think, doing it, about how much of what she was doing she had learned from a story about a foreman she had never met. She only did it, the way you do a thing that has gone into you so deep you no longer remember it arriving. Somewhere past the middle of the night, with the sound above them close enough now to feel through the stone rather than only hear, Sura asked her, in the same flat careful voice as before, how much longer the deepest chamber would hold, and Rue, who had stopped lying to that particular girl 2 nights before, told her the truth, which was that she did not know, and that not knowing was, strangely, easier to bear than a number would have been, because a number was the one thing the man above them wanted from all of this, and she was not going to be the one to hand him even the shape of it in her own voice. "Then what do we do," Sura said, "until it stops holding?" "The same thing we've been doing," Rue said. "We keep them believing the true story. Not the happy one. The true one. That's the whole of the job now, Sura, and you're old enough that I'm going to ask you to help me do it after I can't anymore, if it comes to that, because someone has to be the one who says it plain to the smallest of them when the moment comes, and I would rather it were you than nobody." Sura did not answer for a while, and when she did her voice had gone steadier than Rue had heard it since the first night, the particular steadiness of someone who has decided, quietly and without ceremony, what kind of person she is going to be for whatever time is left to her. "I'll say it," she said. "I know how it goes now. You've said it enough." Rue held on to that, in the last hours, the way she had once held on to the memory of grown-ups holding their faces still, not as comfort, exactly, but as evidence that the thing she was trying to give the children of Saltlick was a thing that could be handed on, from an old survivor to a new one, the way a foreman's count gets carried up out of the dark by whoever is left to carry it. When the deepest chamber's roof finally gave way to the pressure above it, in the gray hour before what would have been a 5th dawn, Rue Calder was at its mouth with the last of the smallest children behind her, and she died the way she had lived the last 4 days, unfolded, her own separate self to the very end, one more name added to a marshal's climbing dead column and not one particle of surrender added to his flat and stubborn 0. She did not know, dying, that she had won the only victory available to her, that the number she had helped drive up was going to reach the archive, was going to be read, was going to become the last and most damning deposit in a file that would someday be laid out whole. She only knew, in the last of it, that she had told the children the true story, and that Sura had it now to give the others, and that this was worth everything, and that it was harder than the other story, and better. By the end there was no one left to fold, which is a different thing from a world that has folded, and Cedron Call walked through the difference for the rest of his life. He took Saltlick, in the sense that there was, at the end, no one left on it to resist him, the deep workings gone silent one by one, the dead column in the ledger risen to a figure that no war in the Accord's history had ever reached against a single frontier colony, an obscene number, a number that was itself the proof of a botch, a waste, a miscalculation, the mark, in the Accord's own doctrine, of someone who did not know what they were doing. And beside it, in the fold index, the 0. Unmoved. The same 0 it had been in the first hour of the first day. Saltlick had not folded. It had been killed, to the last of it, and it had not folded, and the two numbers side by side in the marshal's ledger were the most complete and terrible proof anyone in the whole file had yet produced of the thing the Accord could not survive knowing, that these people could be destroyed, entirely, to the last child and the last deep working, and never once, at any point in the destroying, be made to stop. Flag Officer Vroi brought him the final figures herself, on the 5th morning, and read them to him in a voice that had gone very careful, very level, the voice of an officer who has decided that whatever she is feeling is not a thing her marshal needs handed to him along with the report. She did not ask him what he intended to do with the ledger. She had asked him enough questions in the last 4 days, and she had begun, reading his face across the cabin, to suspect that there was no answer left in him that she wanted to hear. Call sat with the ledger afterward, alone, for a long time. He did not file it. That was the last thing, the thing he could neither do nor undo. The ledger was a formal fleet document, and it was supposed to be filed, submitted up the chain, entered in the record, and Cedron Call found that he could not submit it, because to submit it was to enter into the permanent record of the Accord the proof, in his own fleet's figures, that a human world had been destroyed entire and never folded, and that the marshal who did it had known by the fourth night that it would not fold and had gone on anyway. He could not file that. And he could not destroy it, because it was true, and because destroying it would be one lie too many even for a man who had just told the largest lie of his life with a whole world's worth of the dead. So he kept it. He sat with the ledger, the climbing dead and the flat zero, the incontrovertible thing, the full grave that was also a proof, and he could neither file it nor forget it nor unknow it, and that was his sentence, self-passed, and he served it the rest of a short and sleepless life, the marshal who stopped once, and could not live with stopping, and came back to prove that stopping was the mistake, and proved instead that it was the only mercy the truth had ever allowed him, and paid for the proof with a world, and got, in the end, neither his certainty nor his sleep. I told you I would not make this easy to watch, and I have not, and now that it is done let me say the hard thing at the center of it, because the season has been building toward it and this is where it has to be said. Cedron Call is the villain of this story, and I want to be precise about why, because it is not the reason you might reach for first. He is not the villain because he was cruel, though what he did was the cruelest thing in this whole account, nor because he lacked courage, though the courage he had was spent entirely in the wrong direction. He is the villain for the reason the season has been circling from the first empty box. He is the good person, or the once good person, who could not bear a truth, and decided that the rest of the world could not be allowed to make him face it. He had the truth at Cold Harbor, for free, from a reckoner who told him plainly, on a bridge, in a voice that shook. He ran from it. And when he could not outrun it he came back and killed a world to try to make it not be true, and when the world's own death proved it true past any denying, he went on killing rather than stop and know. Every catastrophe in this season has been a version of that single act, the good person who decides that a truth is unbearable, and chooses, at everyone else's expense, not to bear it. Call is only the most naked version, the one with the body count that makes the shape of it impossible to miss. He killed a world to avoid a sentence a reckoner had already said to him for nothing, and he did it with a flag officer at his shoulder who saw the whole of it and could not stop him either, because a subordinate's honesty, it turns out, is no match for a marshal who has decided which truth he can live with. And Rue Calder is not the hero, and would have refused the word, and did refuse it, in effect, telling frightened children in the dark that they were not brave, they were only themselves, and that being themselves was the thing that could not be folded. She did not win. Saltlick is gone. Every soul in it is in the marshal's dead column, Pell and Sura among them, and the deep workings that once held 400 people hold, now, only the silence that is left when a place stops being able to hold anyone at all. But she did the one thing that was available, which was to make the dying mean something the marshal could not control, to drive the number up so high, so uselessly, that it became witness, became proof, became the deposit that would someday help a galaxy understand what had been done and why it had failed. She spent herself and her town not on survival, which was never on offer, but on the truth, on making the ledger say, in numbers no one could argue with, the thing the Accord had spent 100,000 years arranging not to have to read, they did not fold. We killed them all, and they did not fold, and the difference is the whole of it. She gave Saltlick, in the end, exactly what Cold Harbor had once given her, an hour, and then another hour, bought at the price of herself, so that someone smaller could have a little more time to go on being who they were before the roof came down. The ledger did not stay with Call. He could not file it and he could not destroy it, and a document that a man can neither file nor destroy is a document that gets out, eventually, the way those things do, carried by a flag officer who could not unsee the zero, or found among a dead marshal's effects, or simply leaked from the great slow machine of an empire that keeps everything. It reached the archive. It joined the others, a reckoner's empty box, a marshal's blank line, a scholar's sealed monograph, a tactician's hazard note, a senate's transcript, a sounder's testimony, an administrator's confession, and it was the worst of them, and the most certain, the one written not in an empty box but in a full grave, the one that proved with a whole world's death the thing all the others had only reported, that there was no fold in these people, that you could take everything from them, everything, down to the last, and never once make them stop. It went into the growing file. And the file was very nearly whole now, and very nearly ready, and somewhere an archivist who had kept the first empty box since he was a junior clerk was about to be handed the last and most terrible page, and to lay them all in a row at last, and read across them, left to right, like a sentence, and understand the whole of what his civilization had learned and refused to know,